I was sitting on the kitchenette floor at 6:42 a.m. with my phone in one hand and a cigarette I had not lit in the other when the world decided to awaken. The cigarette was leftover from a packet Junho had left when he was home on leave a month ago. I kept one in my hand sometimes when I was about to read something heavy. The thread I was on was the Awakening Korean language sub, a translated post from a Chinese awakener who had got mimic, F-rank, 3 days earlier. 2,000 upvotes of contempt. The word parasite appeared 6 times. I read the thread to the bottom. I locked the phone. I put the cigarette back in the pack. Dooyeon was asleep on the bunk above me. The kitchenette smelled of last night's instant ramyun. The fluorescent strip in the corridor outside the room was making its small dying sound. The goshiwon was 2 bunk, 1 window onto the alley, shared bathroom 3 doors down. I had stopped waiting for anything to happen in it about 2 years ago. The not waiting had become the room. I sat against the half-fridge with the phone face down on the linoleum. The window dropped into the corner of my vision, the way a cacao banner does without sound, just there. Class assigned, mimic. Rank F. Description, copy adjacent abilities. Source must be within 5 meters. Duration, 1 hour. Quality may vary. I read it again. I read it a 3rd time, in case the 3rd reading would be the one that changed it. It wasn't. I had been trying not to be exceptional. The universe had assigned me a parasite class with a hidden multiplier and no opt-out. I sat very still on the kitchenette floor for 45 seconds and did not get up. The world outside became specific in a way it had not been a minute before. I could hear the convenience store cashier across the alley unlocking her shutter. A moped engine 3 streets over. A cacao notification from someone's phone in the goshiwon next door. The fluorescent strip in the corridor cycled once and stayed dark. Above me, Dooyeon rolled over on the bunk and groaned. Dooyeon woke up at 6:51, and the first thing he did was check his own window. I heard the swipe. He always swiped through notifications, even now, even in a brand new world with a HUD in his eye instead of on the screen. Then I heard him laugh. "Hi Young," he said from the bunk above. "I got Pyromancer." I said, "What rank?" "D. They're letting D-rank Pyromancers apply for the firefighting reserves. Actual job openings. Did you see?" He climbed down the ladder, still grinning, and went past me to the kitchenette counter without looking down at me on the floor. He took the half-melted yuzu candle my mother had sent him last Chuseok and put it in front of him. He did not ask me about my class. He was too busy looking at the candle. "Watch this," he said. He snapped his fingers. The candle took the flame, no lighter, just a small clean blue point that settled on the wick and burned the way a candle is supposed to burn. He was delighted with himself. I had never seen him this delighted with anything, including the time he had finally read a blueprint at work without asking his manager for help. My window updated. Source ability detected, ignite, D-rank, within copy range. I looked at the candle. I looked at the notification. I thought, without meaning to, without deciding to, copy this. The HUD updated. Active ignite amp plus, 18 2 times time, 00004 drain, source heat signature minus 42%. The candle in Dooyeon's hand doubled in size and then doubled again. The wax went liquid in 2 seconds. The flame hit the ceiling tile. The ceiling tile started to smoke. Dooyeon, 8 feet away on the floor, said "huh" in a voice I had not heard him use and grabbed his own wrist. The ceiling tile caught in a circle the size of a dinner plate. I tapped my right thumb against my right index finger twice, the tick I had picked up in college during finals, the one my hand did when I was trying to make a decision, and tried to find the command to turn the copy off. The HUD said active. The HUD did not say stop. The flame doubled a 3rd time. The sprinklers went off. Dooyeon was shouting. The 2 goshiwon next doors started shouting through the thin walls. The corridor light cycled 3 times and stayed dark. A smoke alarm somewhere on the floor started up. I sat in sprinkler water with the cigarette pack in my pocket and the system window in the corner of my vision, and the system hummed its first unprompted note. Mimic copy quality 18, 2 times source. Notation, amp plus. Do-Yun pulled me up off the floor by my elbow. "Ha-young," he said, into the sprinkler water rain, "we have to go." I nodded. I was still tapping. The HUD was still active. The sprinklers ran for 2 more minutes. The copy ended when Do-Yun set the candle down and stopped using his own ability. I worked that out a minute later, watching the HUD finally red inactive in the corner of my vision while the sprinklers wound down to a drip. The flame had gone out somewhere in the doubling. The ceiling tile was a brown ruin. The kitchenette floor was an inch of water. Do-Yun was sitting against the far wall in his soaked construction trade t-shirt, laughing in the slightly hysterical register he got into when something had stopped happening. The manager was shouting in the corridor at someone 3 doors down. Do-Yun caught his breath. He looked at me. "Ha-young," he said, "what's your class?" I said, "F-rank, mimic." He paused. He said, "Oh." He did not say anything else. We sat in the sprinkler water for 30 seconds. The window in the corner of my vision had gone small, a thumbnail, the way they all eventually do, and when I focused on it, it read, "Class Mimic, rank F-amp plus, 18, 2 times confirmed." I walked out of the goshiwon room in wet socks. The corridor light was still dead. The manager was shouting at someone 3 doors down. The cigarette I had not lit was on the kitchenette floor behind me, ruined. The window in the corner of my vision had gone small, F-mimic, 18, 2 times. The numbers were the only thing the system had said about me that nobody else's class had on its window. I walked down the corridor in the dark. Wednesday morning, the subway was the same subway it had always been, except half the people on it had a window in their vision. The train was packed in the post-awakening way. Of 22 passengers in my carriage, I counted 14, with the middle-distance refocus of someone reading their own HUD. A woman across the aisle closed her eyes and breathed through what was probably per-class overload. A man in his 50s grinned at his phone the way you grin when you have rolled something good. The Bureau had issued a press statement at 6 the night before, careful, vague, promising a Sunday briefing, and most of the carriage was ignoring it in favor of the threads. I got off at Gangnam. I walked the 4 blocks to Samlink. I had not told anyone at work. The stand-up was at 9:30, 7 people in the small conference room on the 11th floor. The team lead, F-rank filer, useless ability, good sport about it, had asked everyone with a class to demo theirs over the past 2 days. Minjai was up that morning. Park Minjai, Tier 2 escalation, late 20s, the kind of person who had 3 plants on her desk and watered them on a schedule. She had woken up Tuesday as D-rank analyst. Her ability was called Insight, a 5-minute passive that sharpened pattern recognition. She demonstrated it by closing her eyes for half a second, the way the manual told her to, then opening them again. Nothing visible. She said, "It feels like wearing my glasses for the first time." My HUD updated. Source ability detected, Insight, D-rank, within copy range. I copied. I did not mean to. The thought was the trigger, the same way the candle had been on Monday morning, before I had even decided I had a class. Active Insight Amp Plus, 9 1 times time, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 drain, source minus 38%. The conference room sharpened. The fluorescent flicker I had not noticed before, the small dent in the table where someone had set down a hot mug, the typo on the slide behind the team lead, quaintly without the second R and the ticket. A Tier 3 escalation I had been staring at for 3 weeks, a customer's ERP CRM integration failing under nightly batch loads, opened up in my head like a folded map. The wrong cron schedule, the missing handshake retry, the misconfigured timeout, the third-party library version mismatch, the whole dependency chain in one piece. The meeting ended at 9:55. Across the bullpen, Minjai sat at her desk, fanned herself, and told the woman in the next chair her head felt weird. The team lead, walking past my desk, paused, almost said something, and didn't. I dropped the copy. The HUD went inactive. The room dulled by a notch and stayed dull. It took me 11 minutes after the meeting to write the resolution. I walked home that evening because I wanted to think. The walk from Gangnam to Sinchon is about an hour if you take the surface roads and don't stop. I stopped twice, once at a GS25 for a triangle kimbap, 4,500, and 2 cans of Cass, 5,200 the pair, once at the small park between Hapjeong and Sinchon to sit on a bench and watch the dog walkers. The cashier at the GS25 had a window open in her vision. You could tell by the way she tracked. She rang me up. She was friendly. She did not ask me anything. I thought about Minjai fanning herself in the bullpen at 9:55. I had caused that. 2 hours later, she had been fine. But I had caused 2 hours of feeling weird in her body so that I could solve a ticket 11 minutes faster than I otherwise would have. The math was not nothing. The discourse on mimics had at least that much right. I kept walking. I asked Dooyun if I could test the copy on him. He was on the kitchenette floor with a new candle, a yuzu-scented one from Olive Young that had cost him 7,001 and that he had picked specifically because the wick was thicker. He was, I had come to understand, the kind of person whose Pyromancer class made him feel important and useful, and the chance to be tested was the same as the chance to be useful again. Young, he said, run it. The HUD readouts that night, in the order they appeared on the candle. Active Ignite Amp Plus, 18, 2 times time, 00004 drain, source heat signature minus 42%. The flame doubled, the wick crisped, the wax ran down the side in 2 clean lines, same as Monday, the repeat to confirm. Active Ignite Amp Plus, 4 times time, 00004 drain, source heat signature minus 39%. The flame barely flickered. Dooyun laughed. He said, Young, did the system get tired? Active Ignite Amp Plus, 8 times time, 00004 drain, source heat signature minus 40%. The flame quadrupled, and a long single tongue of yuzu-scented flame reached up and singed Dooyun's left eyebrow. He swore, brushed it, laughed again. The eyebrow was thinner now. Active Ignite Amp Plus, 24 7 times time, 00004 drain, source heat signature minus 38%. The flame tripled and the wax went liquid in 3 seconds. The whole side of the candle ran down onto the linoleum. Dooyun stopped laughing on the 4th one. He sat back on the floor. The drain line had not changed much, between -38 and 42% every time, but the Amp Plus had. 4 numbers, 4 different runs of the same ability, the same drain on him, 4 different outputs. He said, looking at the puddle of yuzu wax, Young, does that make me feel weird? I said after a beat, yeah. He thought about it. I can take it for 30 minutes, just don't do it to anyone you don't tell. Dooyun went to bed at 10:30. I sat on the kitchenette floor with the candle on the counter, unlit now, and the HUD blank in the corner of my vision. Quality was random per copy. I did not know how to make it better. I did not know if it could be made better. I knew that I had to ask Dooyun before I copied. That was a thing the threads did not say. I took the bus instead of the subway on Thursday because the bus was slower. The 271 runs Sinchon to Gangnam with a stop pattern that lets you watch a carriage instead of bracing inside one. I sat second from the back by the window and counted. Of 22 passengers, 14 had the middle distance refocus of a new awakener. One was a woman in her early 20s in a hoodie with a Yongsan keychain on her backpack, gripping the seat in front of her with both hands like the train was about to break. Her eyes were closed. She had been reading her window for 10 minutes. My HUD updated when I looked at her. Source ability detected, shield, D-rank, single use, within copy range. She had been afraid to test her own ability. I worked that out from the way she was sitting, the new awakener problem, the same one the threads complained about, that if you use a one-shot, then you have to wait 24 hours for it to recharge, and you spend that day knowing you don't have it. I had thought about it on the walk to the stop. The official duration spec for a copy was 1 hour. If the official spec held for me, then copying a single-use ability gave me 1 shot in 1 hour, and then nothing. I had a theory. I wanted to test it without telling anyone what I was testing. I copied her. Active shield amp plus 14 0 times time 0 drain source minus 41%. Nothing visible happened. Shields don't show until they're hit. The Yonsei student across the aisle opened her eyes briefly, frowned at her own window in a way that suggested she had noticed something change, and closed them again. The bus ride was 25 minutes. I sat, the timer ticked. At 1/500th of an hour, the system volunteered an unprompted note in the corner of my vision. Distance from source, 6m drain attenuating with distance. I had not moved, the bus had moved. The source was the bus's reference frame. Distance from her in the bus was 3 feet. I read the note. 5 minutes later, there was a second one. Distance from source, 7m source drain residual, 22%. The drain was attenuating not just with metric distance, but with how long I had been holding the copy past her body's adjustment to it. The Yonsei student opened her eyes again at minute 12, sat up straighter, and put one hand in her hoodie pocket. The residual was fading. The bus pulled into Sinchon Rotary, Sinchon, Hapjeong, Hongdae entrance, and finally Gangnam Station. At each stop I watched the timer climb. I did not turn the shield off. I got off the bus at Gangnam Station, and the HUD did not turn off. Active shield amp plus 14 0 times time 2501 drain source minus 8%. The Yonsei student stayed on the bus. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. The drain on her, by the time the bus had gone 2 blocks, was at the floor 3%, 4%, sliding down. I had held her single shot for 25 minutes past the moment she should have been able to recharge it. I was now further from her than I had ever been with a copy active, and the copy was still active. I walked the 4 blocks to Samlink. I kept the shield on the whole walk. It was not visible. It was not testable. It was a number in the corner of my vision and a small private fact about my class that the discourse threads had not surfaced. I got in the elevator. I rode it up to the 11th floor. I sat down at my desk. The HUD did not blink. By 8:47, the shield had been active for 47 minutes. Active shield amp plus 14 0 times time 4712 drain source minus 3%. The source was somewhere on the Yonsei campus by now, 3 kilometers across the city, in a lecture or in a coffee shop or asleep in her dorm. The drain on her was, the system said, 3%. The system said in 2 more readouts over the next 20 minutes that the drain was attenuating but not zeroing. 3% was 3%. Functionally, she would not feel it. Technically, she was still missing something. I sat at the help desk and worked through Tier 1 tickets without taking the shield off. Nobody noticed. The HUD was in the corner of my vision, and the corner of my vision was mine. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice, for the second time in 2 days. The thought, sitting at the Samlink desk, with a copied D-rank shield active at 14 times its baseline 3 kilometers from the source, was the cleanest thought I had had since Tuesday at 6:47. Quality was random. Quantity was, for me, unbounded. I dropped the shield at 11:53 when I stood up to go for a kimbap. The HUD read inactive in the corner of my vision. The Yonsei student was somewhere in her morning lecture. I had held her single shot for almost 3 hours. The system had not warned me. The system had volunteered 2 distance readouts and 1 drain residual, and that was all. The window was honest. The discourse was lazy. I went down to the lobby for the kimbap. The Bureau of Awakening Affairs, Mapo branch, had scheduled 4,000 interviews per day across Seoul. I had my paper ticket in one hand, B37, and the Friday afternoon Mapo lobby in my peripheral vision. 45 people in plastic seats, the linoleum, the fluorescent overhead, the wall posters that the Bureau had printed in their internal department 6 weeks before the global awakening, because the discourse on mimics had already given them the wording they needed. Know your rank, know your duty. Rank C and below, community service exemptions. Parasite class registration, priority lane. The priority lane poster had its own desk and its own door. I did not look at it directly. Two teenagers in school uniforms were sitting across from me, both clearly F-rank, both shy about it. A woman in a tailored suit was at the end of the room reading a bureau briefing pamphlet upside down. She would be a rank or higher and on the wrong wait list. A delivery man in a uniform sat near her. The PA called numbers in tens. The PA called B37 at 2:30. Interview room 12B at the MAPO Bureau was the same dimensions as every Korean municipal interview room I had ever sat in. Beige walls, a small window looking onto an internal courtyard, a desk, two chairs, a tablet, a paper file, a half-finished can of bokbanya-flavored carbonated water. The officer at the desk was Yoon Hyo-rin, 26, Bureau Field Officer kit, navy blazer, no tie, ID lanyard, the small five-pointed bureau pin on her left lapel, shoulder-length straight hair in a low pony, glasses she only put on to read. She watched me come in. She did not stand up. Park Seo-jun, 27, help desk at Samlink, registered yesterday, she said. Please confirm. I said I confirmed. She ran the standard intake. Class, rank, description, any incidents in the first 72 hours. I told her mimic, F-rank, copy adjacent abilities, source within 5 meters, duration 1 hour, quality may vary. There was a small kitchen fire at my goshiwon. It was put out. She made a note. She did not ask me how it started. She asked me to demonstrate the ability. I told her I could not activate it without a source within range. This was half true. Dooyeon's Ignite was 8 kilometers away in a MAPO office on the other side of the river, but the only awakened ability in this room belonged to her, and copying her D-rank Sentry would have tagged us both inside the system's own diagnostics. I did not want to find out what the Bureau did when their own officers' class registered an unscheduled drain mid-interview. She nodded. She made another note. The tablet ticked. She said casually, "Have you copied anyone yet?" I tapped my right thumb against my right index finger twice. The tick, the one my hand did when I was about to decide something, and said no. Her eyes flickered to my hand. She did not say anything. She made a final note on the form. She told me I was provisionally classed F-rank mimic, pending verification, return within 30 days if I used the ability. She walked me to the elevator because the Bureau required officers to escort interviewed awakeners off the floor. In the corridor, after the interview room door closed behind us, she did not speak for the first 20 feet. Then she said, quietly, conversationally, "My class is Sentry, passive perception, +03 on visual acuity, +02 on hearing. It also tags awakeners I've interviewed." I said, "For how long?" 12 months. I said, "Will it tag the copy?" She didn't answer that. She pressed the elevator button. We waited, she said. "I don't ask questions I don't want answers to." The elevator arrived. I stepped in. She stayed in the corridor. As the doors closed, she said, "Take care of your roommate." The doors closed on her. She had not raised her voice. She had not changed her expression. She had told me, between the standard intake and the elevator, that her tag on my class would last 12 months, that she had cross-referenced my recent contacts, that she had read the goshiwon manager's fire report and connected it to Dooyeon's Pyromancer registration the previous day, and that she was not going to put any of it into a file. The elevator dropped 12 floors to the lobby. I had a printout in my hand that said F-rank mimic pending verification and a tag on my class that would expire in 12 months. The bureau officer, who had not asked me the question she should have asked, had told me to take care of my roommate. The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank. I walked out of the bureau into the MAPO afternoon, and the heat off the sidewalk smelled like asphalt and like the convenience store across the street, and like a parasite class that had a hidden multiplier and one witness. Dooyeon wanted tteokbokki on Saturday. The walk from the goshiwon to Itaewon tteokbokki is 8 minutes through the Sinchon backstreets. The streets were post-awakening normal, slightly louder than usual, slightly more people on their phones, a news drone over the main intersection at Sinchon Rotary doing slow, lazy circles. Dooyeon was in his weekend mood, the one where his Pyromancer class was still new enough that he wanted to mention it. He had signed up for the D-rank firefighting reserve evaluation next month. He had also bought himself a new lighter on principle, even though he no longer needed one, because the right way to be a pyromancer in his head was to have backup. He showed it to me as we walked. It was a Zippo with a small dragon embossed on the side. He had paid 18,001 for it. I did not tell him. I thought it was funny. The stove at Itaewon had been failing for 2 weeks. The Arjama who ran the place, Sajangnam, 60-something, the actual name had stopped appearing in conversation 11 years ago, had been lighting her gas burner with a long kitchen torch since the electric igniters had given up. Her grandson kept meaning to come fix it. The torch worked, but it was annoying. She had been complaining about it to every regular who came in. Do-yun, sitting at the counter, said, "Sajangnam want me to light it. My class is Pyromancer." She laughed. Her grandson had already told her about him. She said sure. Do-yun snapped his fingers under the right burner. The blue flame caught clean and held. She was delighted. She offered him a free side of mew for it. She set the radishes down between us with a small ceremonial flourish. The tteokbokki came up at 12:55. I was at the counter across from Do-yun, 10 feet of formica, the small old-style condiment caddy between us with the gochugaru shaker and the dropped sesame oil. The lunch crowd was 3 other tables and us, all eating, none of them paying attention to anyone else. Do-yun was halfway through his first bite when I decided to test something. I did not need to use the ignite. I had no candle to light, no stove I needed running. I just wanted to know whether the sauce drain registered across a counter of distance, and whether Do-yun would feel it through the act of eating. I copied. Active Ignite Amp Plus, 11.7 times time, 0.0001 drain sauce %. Do-yun froze mid-bite. He put the chopsticks down. He grabbed his own wrist with his other hand. He said very quietly, looking at the formica counter, "You doing anything weird?" I said after a beat, "Yeah." I dropped the copy. The HUD went inactive. Do-yun let go of his own wrist. His shoulders unwound by half an inch. Sajangnam was at the far end of the counter wiping down the till and had not noticed anything. The other tables had not noticed anything. There were no witnesses. Do-yun looked at his tteokbokki for a long second. He said, "It feels like a fingernail missing. Like you know when you bite a nail too far down and it's tender for a day, that." I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Don't be sorry, tell me first." We finished the tteokbokki without going back to it. He told me about the firefighting reserve evaluation, the test format, the instructor's reputation, a B-rank pyromancer named Min Tiwoo who had been an army firefighter before the precursor awakening, what Do-yun should practice, control over output, not ceiling. The ceiling was the ceiling. The test rewarded precision. I listened. I kept my right hand under the counter and out of his sightline. I had caused Do-yun a fingernail missing for 9 seconds, and Minjai at the bullpen 2 days before for 2 hours, and the Yonsei student on the bus 3 days before for almost 3 hours past her own use window. 3 people in 5 days. The math was unambiguous. The discourse on mimics had at least that much right. The cost on the source was real. The source noticed. Just don't copy people was a defensible rule even if the discourse used the wrong word for it. I had not eaten a parasite class with a hidden multiplier and 1 witness, the way I had walked out of the bureau the day before thinking I had. I had eaten a class that cost other people something whenever I used it. Sajangnam came over to refill the radish bowl. She said, casually, the way the Arjama at every tteokbokki place mentions the weather. "I heard there's a mimic in the neighborhood. My grandson saw it on the news." Do-yun did not say anything. I did not say anything. Sajangnam refilled the bowl, took the empty soup bowls back to the counter, and went on with her afternoon. We walked home through the Sinchon backstreets the same way we'd come in. Do-yun was 3 steps ahead and not in a hurry. I had caused him a fingernail missing for 9 seconds, so I could see if I could feel the drain from across the counter. The discourse on mimics had at least that much right. The discourse on mimics did not say what I would do with the answer. We watched the briefing in the goshiwon, on Do-yun's phone propped against the wall. KBS Evening News had been running pre-briefing graphics for an hour. The bureau seal, the Parasite Registry Division wordmark, a small countdown clock in the corner counting down to 6. The anchors were filling time. They mentioned, in the way they did when they did not know what was coming, that the briefing was expected to address recent concerns about unregistered awakeners in the capital region. Do-Yun, on the bottom bunk with a cup of Shin Ramyun, said, "Hyung, are they going to put you on a list?" I said, "Already am, F-rank, pending verification." He thought about that. He ate 2 noodles. He said, "I mean a different list." I said, "Probably." Director Cho Tae-min appeared on screen at 6 o'clock. The bureau podium, navy suit, no tie, dark grey pocket square, bureau seal behind him, 49 years old, grey at the temples, eyes that did not blink during press briefings. He opened with the standard Korean greeting, named himself and his post, opened the file in front of him. He did not bluff. He said the bureau has, as of 1500 hours Saturday, identified 1 unregistered mimic operating in central Seoul. Source drain residuals pulled from passive Sentry tags across 9 awakened individuals in the Sinchon Gangnam corridor over the past 72 hours confirm the presence. He explained calmly what mimic was and why the registry existed. He said a mimic's class was a public safety matter, not because mimics were evil, but because their copies acted on civilian rank stat ceilings that the civilian was not chosen for. He said if a B-rank construct can lift a sedan and a mimic can copy that ability with an amplifier of 40, that mimic can lift a building. The building does not consent to being lifted. The construct does not consent to having their ability scaled to a magnitude they did not train for. He invited the unregistered mimic to come forward. He said citizens are reminded that harboring an unregistered mimic is a Class 4 offense under the Public Safety Awakening Act of 2026, carrying penalties of up to 24 months suspended. He did not raise his voice. He looked into the camera. He said, "We are not asking the mimic to be punished. We are asking the mimic to be honest." He stepped away from the podium. The KBS anchors picked it up. The Bureau Communications Office was already issuing a press packet. Bureau internal protocol had given Cho a 6-line statement to release as a follow-up. The Sunday evening Korean language X-feeds were going to be loud by 10. The briefing ended at 6:18. Do-Yun set down his ramyun cup. He looked at me. I looked at the phone. Neither of us spoke for half a minute. Do-Yun said slowly, "You haven't told me who you've copied." I said, "You, a co-worker, a college student on the bus." He said, "Sentry tags would catch all 3. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hyung, he's not wrong about the amplifier." I said, "I know." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet." He finished his ramyun. He did not say anything else. He got up and put the cup in the trash. He brushed his teeth in the shared bathroom 3 doors down the corridor. He came back. He climbed up to the top bunk. He pulled the blanket over his head the way he always did when he wanted the world to be smaller for a while. I went to bed at 10. I had work in the morning at Samlink. I took the early subway in the morning because the bus had made my head busy for 30 minutes the previous Thursday, and I wanted Monday quiet. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The briefing on Do-Yun's phone, still propped against the wall, was on a replay loop. Cho Tae-min was still saying we were asking the mimic to be honest. I was at the east end of the Yongsan platform when the front bogie of the second car went off the rail. The morning rush was a Monday rush, packed in the post-awakening way, slightly louder, slightly less patient. I was at the eastern end of the platform, third car back from where the train would stop. I had been on my phone since Hapjeong, reading the comment threads under Cho's briefing, 3,200 comments overnight. I had not made a decision. The train decelerated. I put the phone away. I noticed, mildly, that the front car was shimmying in a way it usually didn't. 2 seconds later, there was a metallic shriek, and the bogie went off the rail. The second car tipped. Passengers on the platform screamed. The car settled at about 35 degrees against the platform lip. A 9-year-old in a yellow backpack and a maroon school uniform was half-pinned at the lip, her right foot under the corner of the carriage. The carriage was leaning. The math was bad. Jang Min-soo got to the car first. A man in his 40s, hard hat in his hand, navy work jacket. He pushed through the crowd and got to the car. He raised his hands. The HUD updated in the corner of my vision. Source ability detected, lift, B rank, single use per minute, within copy range. Jang strained. He was a B rank construct. His lift ceiling was about 500 kilograms one shot per minute. The car was 40 tons. He shifted it by maybe 2 inches. His face was the color of someone who already knew he was going to fail and was going to fail with witness. The girl was still pinned. Jang knew it. The crowd knew it. I was 20 feet behind him. I tapped my right thumb against my right index finger twice and copied. I did not announce. I did not ask. The HUD updated. Active lift amp plus 41 0 times time 00001 drain source minus 38%. Jang, 20 feet ahead with his hands on the car, faltered and grabbed the carriage to keep from falling. His lift ability went gray under the drain. He didn't know what was happening. He thought he was having a heart attack. The crowd didn't notice him. They were watching the car. I put my hand on the underside of the car. I lifted. The car flipped off Itaewon like cardboard. Not just shifted, flipped. 40 tons of subway car went up 6 feet over the platform lip and landed on the opposite tracks with a sound I would later learn registered on the seismic sensors of 3 buildings in Yongsan. The girl was on the platform floor, foot bruised but not broken. The yellow backpack was intact. A woman from the platform teacher's uniform, probably from her school, was already running to her. The girl's name was Park Jae-won, same surname as mine. Common in Korea, no relation. I learned both later from the news. The crowd was silent for 2 seconds. Then the cameras swung around looking for who had done it. I had already stepped back into the 3rd row of the crowd. I had a charcoal jacket on. I had my phone in my hand again. I dropped the lift copy. The HUD went inactive. Jang, on his knees 20 feet away, blinked back to himself. He looked at the car on the opposite tracks. He looked at his own hands. He was going to spend the next 48 hours believing he had done something he didn't know he could do. I was 15 feet back into the crowd by the time the first phone footage went up. Phone footage from at least 8 angles had captured the lift. Half of the angles caught Jang straining and the car shifting 2 inches. Jang would carry that for the rest of the morning. One of the 8, taken by a high schooler at the eastern end of the platform, had caught me in profile in the charcoal jacket with my hand on the underside of the carriage at the moment of the flip. The video uploaded to a Korean language Twitter thread at 7:46. The hashtag Yongsan Hudo in Yongsan Rescue was trending by 7:55. The Bureau monitored that thread automatically. I knew the math the Bureau was going to run. Jang's known class ceiling was 500 kilograms one shot. The observed lift was 40 tons. The residual on Jang's actual contribution was 2 inches of vertical, call it 2 tons equivalent. The unknown copier had provided 38 tons equivalent on a B-rank source. The implied AMP plus was 41. The only registered F-rank mimic in Seoul who had not yet had an AMP plus verification was me. By 8:00, the Bureau would have my coefficient on their internal threat assessment. I walked out of the station with my phone in my hand. I did not call Samlink. I did not call my mother. I did not call Junho. I walked east along Hangangdaero to the embankment. I sat on a bench. The morning joggers were out. The early bird river bikers in their lycra. The sanitation workers in the orange vests with the long brooms. The hand was the color it always was in the morning in late May, gray-brown, slightly milky from upstream silt. I sat on the bench by the hand for 45 minutes and watched the joggers and the early morning bikers and the sanitation workers in their orange vests with their long brooms. I had moved 40 tons of subway car 6 feet off a 9-year-old. I had also drained a B-rank construct named Jang Min-soo to 38% of his ability for 42 seconds in front of 300 witnesses with phones. The hashtag was trending. The Bureau had not yet called. The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank again. I had until the Bureau finished its maths. The morning meeting at the Bureau was at 10:30. Hyorin sat in a glass-walled meeting room with 3 other field officers and a bureau analyst, a paper notepad open on her knee. Bureau Sentry class officers did not trust tablets in classified rooms. Passive perception bleeds across screen reflections, and the room's other awakeners would pick up the signature. The Yongsan footage was on the wall screen at the front, frozen on the 8th angle shot from the high schooler at the eastern end of the platform. Charcoal jacket, hand on the underside of the car, profile in motion. The analyst was running the math. Jang Minsu's known class ceiling, 500 kg one-shot per minute. Observed lift mass, 40,000 kg. Jang's actual contribution from the other 7 camera angles, ~2 inches of vertical, ~2000 kg equivalent. Unknown copier contribution, 38,000 kg equivalent on a B-rank lift source. Implied amp plus, 41. Cho entered at 10:42. He stood at the head of the table. He asked for the cross-reference. The analyst said, there are 11 registered mimics in the Seoul metropolitan area. One was registered Friday, prior to the public press briefing, amp plus unverified. Park Seo-jun, 27, helpdesk worker, Sinchon goshiwon. Cho said, Yoon, you interviewed him. Hyorin said, yes, sir. Cho said, you take it. He did not have to explain why. Her Sentry tag was 12 months on Seo-jun's class signature. She was the unique field officer in the bureau who could locate him within 30 meters anywhere in the metropolitan area. She nodded. The meeting moved on to next items. The bureau van assignment was on her tablet by 11:00. I was on the hand bench for 90 minutes. I had not moved since 9:00. The joggers had thinned out around 10. The sanitation workers had finished their stretch of embankment by 11. A man with a fishing rod set up 4 benches down at 11:15. The bureau Sentry tag on me, the one Hyorin had explained in the corridor on Friday, was pulsing in her tablet at the bureau, locating me to within 30 meters. I did not know about the precision. I did not feel anything. I just looked at the river. I stood up at 11:30. I walked back toward the city. The bureau ops van was parked 2 blocks from the Sinchon goshiwon. Hyorin was in the driver's seat. Her tablet had a soft pulse showing my tag heat signature. I was on foot, moving north, somewhere near Hapjeong. Her partner was a junior officer named Kang, early 30s, D-rank tracker, the kind of officer who treated an apprehension assignment like a career step. Kang said, we should vector to Hapjeong and grab him on the street. Hyorin said, we don't bag a mimic on the sidewalk, we surveil, we invite, we get him to the bureau on his own terms. Kang said, that's not the protocol. Hyorin said, the protocol was written for D-rank constructs. This is an F-rank mimic with a verified 41 times amplifier. He just moved a subway car to save a child. If we bag him on the street and he panics, what happens? Kang did not answer. Hyorin said, we wait, we observe, we pull surveillance from his goshiwon and his workplace. We don't approach until tomorrow at the earliest. Kang said after a pause, yes, Officer Yoon. Hyorin watched the tag. I was now at Hapjeong Station on the south side. I was alone. I got back to the goshiwon at 5 o'clock. I had been walking for 6 hours. Hapjeong to Yeonam-dong to Sangsu to Hongdae to Sinchon. In the wide loop a man does when he is buying himself time without admitting to himself that he is buying himself time. Do-yun was home from work. He had seen the news on his phone at noon and had left the office at 3, told his boss it was a family situation. He was at the kitchenette making instant ramyun for 2 when I came in. He said, they're going to come. I said, yeah. He said, you should pack a bag. I said, yeah. He said, you should also call Junho before you can't. I said nothing for 30 seconds. I had not been planning to call Junho. I had been planning to call my mother in Yosu, who would have been the one to call Junho's unit. Do-yun said, he's going to find out from a barracks TV otherwise. I said, tomorrow. I packed a small backpack, a change of clothes, the charger, my ID, 400,000 won in cash from the emergency tin. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. Doohyun watched me pack from the kitchenette floor. He did not say anything else. The window, for me to be honest, had not closed yet. It had not opened yet either. Jun-ho called at 9 o'clock. Tuesday morning, my phone rang. The display said Jun-ho. I had been awake since 6 and had not eaten, I answered. His voice was slightly compressed by the barracks PX Wi-Fi. Hyung, the news. I said, yeah. He said, was that you? Yeah. Holy shit. Yeah. He said after a beat, you're in trouble. Yeah. Mom doesn't know yet. She will. Yeah. We were both quiet for 10 seconds. He said, I awakened. I said, I figured. What did you get? He said, F-rank surveyor, useless. I said, useless how? He explained, passive ability to measure terrain features, distances, slope, elevation by sight, range about 1 kilometer, calibrated to centimeters. He could look across a parade ground and tell you the boulder 40 meters out was 6.4 meters above sea level, accurate to 2. It was the kind of class that made a man more reliable at saying, that rock is 12 meters away and worth nothing on a battlefield. He was cheerful about it. He had decided to be the unit's joke about it before the unit could make the joke. He had been telling everyone, the squad leader, the other privates, the medic, that he was the army's most accurate ruler. He asked the question at 9:12. He said casually but not casually, Hyung, can mimics like share, like, can you copy something good and then I get it too? I was silent for 5 seconds. I had not thought about that. The system had never said anything to me about transfer. I said, I don't know. He said, I'm not asking for me. I mean, I'm asking for me a little. But I'm asking, could you have given Jang Min-soo back his lift after you copied it? Could you have given Minjai back her insight? I said, I don't know. He said, find out, Hyung. If you can, that changes the whole conversation. That changes what mimics are. I said, it might not work like that. He said, yeah, but find out. I said, I will. Jun-ho said he had to go at 9:25. The PX line was getting backed up. The squad was heading to morning formation. He said before he hung up, Mom, you need to call her today. She's on Kakao Talk all morning. She's going to see the news. I said, I know. He said, don't tell Dad. He'll handle Mom. I said, yeah. He said, Hyung, don't let them take you. I said, I won't. He said, good. Then, Hyung, I'm proud of you. You moved a fucking subway car. F-rank my ass. He hung up. I sat on the floor of the goshiwon for 2 hours after Jun-ho hung up. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. He had told me to find out if copies could be shared. He had told me to not let them take me. He had told me he was proud of me. He was 21. He was in a barracks in Itaewon. He had been awakened to a class that could measure that the boulder 40 meters across the parade ground was 6.4 meters above sea level, accurate to 2 centimeters, and he had taken the assignment with grace. I owed him an answer. The Stack Overflow notification was at 5:15. I had not logged into the account since 2024. The icon in the corner of my browser tab lit up. I clicked. The message was one line, from a username I did not recognize, Yoon26, and the profile was empty except for a location field that said Seoul. Bar called Sleeper in Hongdae, 9 p.m., come alone or don't come. I read it 3 times. I looked at the username again, Yoon26. She had found me through a 2024 cron question I had asked about Linux system timers, traced the email I had used to sign up for Samlink, and built a profile in 20 minutes. I closed the laptop. I sat on the goshiwon floor for 10 minutes. I texted Doohyun, who was at work, going out tonight, probably late. He replied at 5:25, Hyung, bring your bag. I did. She was already in the back booth at 8:55. Sleeper was a basement bar 2 blocks east of Hongdae Station. Dim, 6 booths, a long counter, a soundtrack of slow Korean indie. I walked in at 8:55. Hye-rin was in the back booth on the left, dressed civilian, black t-shirt, jacket on the seat next to her, hair down, no bureau pin, a glass of soju in front of her untouched. She gestured at the seat across from her. I sat. She poured me a glass without asking. I took it. She said, "I'm not here as a bureau officer." I said, "I figured." She said, "My older brother awakened in the precursor event 4 years ago. Frank Mimic, AMP Plus verified at 8, 4 times peak." I was silent. She said, "He registered. He was placed in voluntary supervised containment in a bureau facility in Gimpo. He killed himself 3 months later. He was 24. I said, after a beat, "I'm sorry." She said, "I read the file. The official cause was depression. The actual cause was that the facility's protocol for containing a mimic was to keep him fully isolated. No physical contact, no proximity to any awakened. They were afraid of his ability and called it medically necessary isolation." She looked at me. She said, "He went 73 days without a single touch." She said, "The registry is not a registry. It's a quarantine. I joined the bureau 3 years ago to read the file. I have read it. I have spent a year and a half preparing for the global awakening to surface someone the registry didn't get to first." She pulled out her phone at 9:30. She showed me a photograph, a girl in a school uniform, hair tied back, taken from what was clearly a bureau case file intake portrait. Lee Jian, 14, awakened the previous Tuesday. A rank pain, a passive class with no off switch that let her feel continuously every awakened person's pain within a 50-meter radius. In Central Seoul, this meant at any given moment she was carrying dozens of bodies worth of migraines, period cramps, old injuries, hangovers, joint pain. She had slept 4 hours total in the past 14 days. Her parents had brought her to a bureau intake center on Friday. She was, at the time of the photograph, voluntarily sedated at a MAPO facility while the bureau decided what to do. Hye-rin said, "She has slept 4 hours total in the past 14 days. I said, "And you want me to copy her?" She said, "For 1 hour, to verify the copy works on an A-rank sensory class, to give her 1 hour of sleep without sedatives, to find out if my brother's class was right, that there is something the mimic can do that no other class can." I said, "What if my AMP Plus rolls high? Will it kill me?" She said, "I don't know." I said, "If it doesn't kill me, will I be able to handle pain at 20 times Jian's strength?" She said, "I don't know." I finished my soju. We sat with the question for 15 minutes. We did not talk. I thought about Junho on the phone that morning saying, "Find out." I thought about Minjai at the bullpen fanning herself for 2 hours. I thought about Duyun's missing fingernail at Ioma Titiokboki. I thought about Jang Min-soo on a bench at Yongsan, believing for the next 48 hours that he had done something he could not do. I thought about the 14-year-old in the photograph. I said, "Tomorrow." She said, "Tomorrow." I said, "I need to know one thing. If I do this, I'm going to be on the news again. The drain will register. Bureau Sentry tags will pick it up. Cho will have a fresh AMP Plus reading on me by tomorrow night." She said, "Yes." I said, "Then the next thing I do has to be public on my terms." She said, "Yes." She paid for the soju. We walked out of the bar onto Hongdae Street and separated at the corner. We did not exchange numbers. I walked back to the goshiwon at midnight. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The bureau had not knocked. Duyun was asleep on the top bunk. I lay on the bottom bunk and looked at the ceiling and thought about a 14-year-old in a bureau facility somewhere in Mapo sleeping in sedated nothing for the next 6 months unless I went to her tomorrow. I had been trying not to be exceptional for 4 years, and the universe had assigned me a parasite class with a hidden multiplier and a girl who could not sleep without me. The safe house was on the 3rd floor of a building off Hongdae Street. Yeonam-dong, a small mixed residential commercial building on a quiet alley. The 3rd floor apartment was bare, a futon, a few wooden chairs, a kitchen with 1 cup and no dishes, a bathroom that smelled faintly of someone else's shampoo. Hye-rin met me at the door. She was in civilian clothes again, jeans, a hoodie, no bureau pin. She had been at the safe house for 2 hours setting up. Jayan's parents were in the living room. Lee Yoon-ho, the father, late 40s, a small balding accountant in a Uniqlo button-down. Kim Ma-young, the mother, mid-40s, a nurse, her hair tied back, her shoulders held in the way nurses hold their shoulders when they have not slept in days. They had been told this was an experimental non-sedative protocol involving a registered mimic volunteer who had consented to act as a temporary pain relay. Hyo-rin had used the word volunteer. She had not used the word parasite. I shook hands with Yoon-ho. The mother nodded. She did not extend her hand. She was past handshakes. Jayan was in the small bedroom. She was lightly sedated. The MAPO facility had given her a half dose of lorazepam for the family visit transit. She was in school uniform pants and a faded blue hoodie, her hair in a low ponytail. She was 14 and small for her age. She opened her eyes when I sat on the edge of the bed. I sat on the edge of the bed at 5:15. She looked at me, she looked at her own hands. She said, "Are you the mimic?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Hyo-rin Unnai says it will hurt you." I said, "For a while." She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be." I placed my right hand near hers, not touching, within range. The HUD updated. Source ability detected, pain, a rank passive sensory, within copy range. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. Active pain amp plus, 4 times time, 0.00001 drain, source minus 52%. The first wave was the close radius. Jayan's own pain, the cramps, the 2-week sedation hangover, the headache that had not stopped. Lee Yoon-ho's lower back, Kim Ma-young's wrist tendinitis from years of charting. Hyo-rin by the door, her old marathon injury hip. Then the radius expanded. At 4 times the normal 50-meter A-rank pain ceiling, I was feeling everyone within 320 meters of the safe house, the neighbor's migraine. The GS-25 cashier on the next block with plantar fasciitis. A drunk man 2 streets over with a recent fall. A 91-year-old in the assisted living facility across the alley with bone cancer in her hips and her spine and her right humerus. My vision grayed. I stayed sitting up. Jayan on the bed closed her eyes. Within 30 seconds she was asleep, properly asleep, slack-jawed, heavy, breath deepening, the way a person sleeps who has been awake for 14 days. The hours moved in waves of other people's pain. I sat in the chair next to Jayan's bed for 14 hours. The HUD did not blink. The amp plus stayed at 4 times. The drain on Jayan stayed at minus 52%. Hyo-rin sat in the living room with the parents, who fell asleep on the couch around 9 p.m. Hyo-rin stayed awake. Stamina 84%/100% at 7 p.m. The 91-year-old in the assisted living facility was the one I felt most clearly. Her name on the building's directory, I would learn later from Hyo-rin, was Han Bokrai. She had been awakened the previous Tuesday, 2 B-rank memory, the same class as Sang-cheol, but without the off switch he had not yet found. Her bone cancer had been on her since the previous autumn. The pain in her right hip at midnight was the most specific pain I had ever felt in my life. Stamina 71% at 10 p.m. The convenience store cashier on the next block ended her shift at 1 a.m. and walked home. I felt her plantar fasciitis change pressure as she walked. I felt her stop at a corner to take her shoe off. I felt her sigh. Stamina 58% at 1 a.m. A man in his 30s woke up at 3 with a hangover. A woman in her 60s 3 buildings over had a heart attack adjacent angina episode and reached for her nitroglycerin pill at 4:17. A toddler 1 floor up had a fever cry at 5:30. The full radius of 320 meters of other people's bodies was open to me, and I sat in a chair and let it be open. Jayan did not move. Hyo-rin brought me water twice. I drank both. I did not eat. The HUD ticked. Jayan stirred at 7:14 on Thursday. She opened her eyes slowly. She looked at me. I had been in the chair for 14 hours. I had not slept. I had not stood up. She said, "Did I sleep?" I said, "You slept." She said, "Is my hair okay?" I had tears on my face I had not known were there. I said, "It's fine." She said, "Thank you, Ajasi." She was 14, I was 27. The honorific was comically over-formal and entirely correct from her side. I laughed. It came out half as a sob. I dropped the copy. The HUD went inactive. The pain left me in stages, the far radius first, then mid, then Jayan's own pain last, the cramps and the headache and the residual sedation. Han Bokrai in the assisted living facility was still in her bed. The toddler one floor up was still warm. The cashier was still on her planter. Jayan got up and walked to the bathroom. Hyorin came into the bedroom. She looked at me. I said, "It works." She said, "It works." In the bathroom, Jayan ran the tap. She washed her face for 2 minutes. The sun came up over Yeonam-dong. Hyorin took Jayan back to the Marpo facility at 9. Her parents went with her. The duty officer who had let Jayan out had to be back at his desk at 10. I left the safe house at 9:15 and walked through Yeonam-dong with the HUD blank in the corner of my vision and the pain still echoing in my joints in the way bruises echo. I had drained Jayan by 52% for 14 hours, and she had slept, and was, for now, going back to sedation. The bureau still ran the registry. The math had not changed. Only one 14-year-old had slept who otherwise would not have. That was today. I slept 8 hours after the Jayan copy. I woke at 9 on Friday morning. I drank 2 glasses of water. I ate 2 convenience store onigiri. I called Samlink and told the team lead I was sick, flu-like, fever, probably 48 hours. He did not ask me follow-ups. He had seen the Yongsan footage 3 days ago and had figured out by now that I was not coming back to my desk. I sat at the kitchenette and read for 2 hours. The Bureau's sanitized press release on Jayan had gone out at midnight. Temporary family visit protocol completed, patient stable, continuing standard care. No mimic, no Hyorin, no 14 hours of sleep. The Cho press briefing thread was at 12,000 comments. Most of them were about me. I stopped reading at noon. I lay on the kitchenette floor. Hyorin's message came at 6. Through the Stack Overflow DM channel, the one we had moved to as a small set of dead drop comms. The username Yoon26 again. The message. Han Sangcheol, B-rank memory, Itaewon side street off Bogwang Row behind Jumcheon Gukbap. Midnight. He has not slept in 12 days, his wife asked. I read it 3 times. The B-rank memory class was one I had thought about. The discourse threads had been on it since the Chinese awakening. Perfect recall sounded like a gift, but B-rank memory had no off switch. Sangcheol had been carrying 12 days of perfect input. Every car horn, every voice, every smell, every flash of light, every itch from his uniform collar, for 2 weeks without sleep. The thread's estimate was that B-rank memory was psychologically incompatible with continued waking life past 3 weeks. He was at 12 days. I replied, I'll be there. I left the goshiwon at 11 p.m. I took the subway. I got to Itaewon at 11:40. I walked down the alley to him. Side street off Bogwang Row, behind a 24-hour gukbap shop. The street was narrow, half a meter of clearance per side, and dark. Hyorin was at the corner in civvies, watching the alley from the Bogwang Row side. Sangcheol was leaning against a brick wall halfway down. He was 51, dockyard build, grey stubble, eyes red-rimmed. He had not shaved in 12 days. His wife had dropped him off and was in their car around the corner. He spoke before I was fully there. Are you the boy from the news? I said, yes, Arjasi. He said, I can hear your footsteps from the last time I walked past this alley 3 days ago. They sound the same. I remember every step. I said, I'm sorry. He said, can you make it stop, just for a few hours? I said, I'll try. The HUD updated. Source ability detected. Memory, B-rank, passive sensory, within copy range. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. Active memory amp plus, 28, 3 times time, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 drain, source minus 47%. 12 days of Sangcheol's perfect recall hit me at 28 times normal sensory resolution. Every sound, the 38 different sirens he had heard since Tuesday, the 41 different lighters clicking in coffee shops he had passed, the 2,000 car horns, the 810 Kakao notification pings, the bird that had landed on his windowsill at 4:13 on Wednesday morning. The smell of his wife's hand cream from her morning routine, 6 mornings in a row, slightly different each time. The taste of cold coffee from the dockside warehouse break room at 11:08 on Thursday. Every visual frame of every face he had seen at the warehouse and on his commute, indexed and retrievable. I stayed standing. He slid down the wall to sitting. He exhaled for the first time in 2 weeks. He began to weep, not melodramatically, just the slow, steady weeping of a man who had been awake for 12 days and was finally not. I stayed standing. I did not say anything. The alley was quiet. The wife was around the corner in the car. Hye-rin was at the entrance. I held the copy for 4 hours. Sang-cheol slept against the wall for 3 of them. His wife came around the corner at 1 a.m. and helped him up. They went home. I stayed in the alley. I dropped the copy at 4:00. The HUD went inactive. The memory pressure left me in stages, first the far back days, then the more recent ones, then the last hour of Sang-cheol's own footsteps in the alley before I had arrived. The alley was quiet. I sat on the curb. Hye-rin walked down the alley and sat next to me. She said, "There's another. Itaewon dong woman, F-rank empathy with overflow, the discourse calls it bleed. She felt her husband's death from a car accident in the next ward while she was at home cooking dinner. She has been having panic attacks for a week." I said, "When?" She said, "Tomorrow night if you're up for it, the night after if you're not." I said, "Tomorrow night." She said, "Underground is forming. People are talking about you in the awakened DMs." I said, "I figured." She said, "Bureau will move on you within 72 hours. Cho is faster than we hoped." I said, "Then we have 72 hours." I walked back to the subway at 5 in the morning. The first trains were just starting. The Itaewon streets were the way Itaewon streets are at 5, quiet, the dark Galbi places closed, the foreign tourist crowds gone, the sanitation workers in their orange vests at the corners. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The underground was forming. I had 72 hours. The emoji was a clock face. It dropped into the Telegram channel, the channel we had set up Tuesday in a fresh, untraceable group of 2, named after a 2014 Korean indie band, at 2:54 p.m. Saturday. The single emoji was the signal we had prearranged after the bleed woman copy the previous night. Clock face meant 6 minutes. 6 minutes was Hye-rin's intel on a bureau tactical entry. I had been on the bottom bunk in the goshiwon, recovering from Sang-cheol's memory the night before last and from the bleed woman's 6-hour empathy copy the night before. I had slept 4 hours total since Friday. The HUD had been blank for 9 hours. I got up, I put on shoes. I grabbed the small backpack I had packed Monday night, clothes, charger, ID 14000 in cash. I sent Do-yeon, who was at the Marpo office, going somewhere, don't come home until after 6. He replied at 2:55, Hayoung, stay safe. I left the goshiwon room, the corridor lights were on, I went for the stairwell. I went down the stairs. The goshiwon is on the 5th floor. I heard the lobby door at street level open while I was on the 4th floor landing, 3 sets of boots into the lobby, 2 more in the building elevator queue. The elevator on this building was small and slow. The tactical team had split, 2 for the elevator, 3 for the stairs. I was on the stairs. They were coming up. We were going to meet between floors 2 and 3. I rounded the floor 3 landing. He was on the landing already. Bureau Field Officer, Lieutenant Kim by his lapel tag, mid-40s, ex-army from the way he held his shoulders. B-rank anchor, the line-of-sight, single-target hold-in-place class that Bureau Tactical liked because it produced no permanent injury and no collateral. He had done this kind of apprehension a dozen times. He saw me first. He said, Park Seo-jun, stand down. My HUD updated. Source ability detected, anchor, B-rank, single target, within copy range. He raised his hand to activate. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. Active anchor amp plus, 11:0 times time, 0:00:01 drain, source -52%. Kim's anchor faltered. He was at his ceiling for output. Under a 52% drain, his hand could not push the cast through. His anchor field shimmered between us and dissipated. I pivoted. I anchored the stairwell wall behind him. The reinforced concrete block wall on the inside of the stair turn, frozen in position relative to the building's frame of reference at 11 times B rank for 15 seconds. The wall, frozen against a building that had a small structural sway in the spring breeze, developed a stress fracture as the building moved and the wall did not. A 2-foot horizontal gap opened between the floor 3 landing and the floor 2 ceiling. Concrete dust came down in a small clean line. Kim was on one knee, grey from the drain. I slid through the gap. I dropped to the floor 2 landing. I dropped the anchor copy. The HUD went inactive. The wall would unfreeze in 15 seconds. The 2 officers behind Kim were on the floor 4 stairs by now, drawn by the sound. I went down the next flight to floor 1. The lobby was empty. The 2 remaining officers from the lobby team were upstairs by now. They would have heard the structural crack and turned around. The front desk attendant was the goshiwon manager's wife. She had been at the front desk every Saturday for 14 years. She had seen me come and go for 2 years. She knew the floor plan better than the bureau team did. She looked at me. She did not say anything. She pointed at the small, unmarked door behind the desk, the back exit that opened onto the alley behind the goshiwon, used for trash pickup, not visible from the street. I nodded to her. I went through the door. Hye-rin's van was at the corner of Daehyundong Street. The alley behind the goshiwon was narrow, with the recycling bins on the south side and a row of air conditioner condensers on the north. I followed it east for 100 meters and came out onto a quiet residential street 1 block north of the Sinchon Rotary. I walked briskly, not running, because running on a Saturday afternoon residential street in Sinchon is the surveillance flag that would have me made 4 blocks east toward Yonsei University's East Gate. The van was at the corner of Daehyundong Street, a grey Hyundai Starex, no bureau markings, plates that I would later realize were fleet plates from a bureau backup pool that Hye-rin had been told the lease record on 3 years ago. The driver was Officer Kang, junior D-rank tracker, the one who had been Hye-rin's partner in the Monday van. Hye-rin had brought him over in the 48 hours after Yongsan. Kang was at the wheel. Hye-rin was in the passenger seat. She was not looking at her tablet. I opened the back door and got in. Kang drove. The van pulled away from the corner at the speed of a Saturday afternoon Sinchon delivery van. Hye-rin's tablet on her lap lit up. The Bureau Internal Affairs portal had flagged her as unreachable as of 3:04. Her Sentry tag on me had also gone offline for the same reason. Internal Affairs protocol revoked your active tags when you went unreachable, on the theory that an unreachable officer might be compromised. The Bureau no longer had a real-time fix on my location. She put the tablet face down on the dashboard. Kang drove east through Sinchon toward the Han. The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank. I had fractured a concrete block wall on the 3rd floor stairwell of my goshiwon. I had drained a B-rank anchor named Lieutenant Kim to 48% for 30 seconds. The Bureau had moved on me at 2:55 and missed by 4 blocks. The clock had accelerated. Hye-rin was unreachable. Do-yun would be home from work by 6. I was in the back of a grey Hyundai Starex, going east through afternoon traffic. Jun-ho was at the south exit with his duffel. The van dropped me at the curb at 8:45. Hye-rin said, 20 minutes, then we move. I nodded. I walked up the steps to the south exit landing. He was at the top of the stairwell, fatigue pants, regulation grey sweatshirt, hair shorn close in the way the army shore it for the 2nd year of service, a duffel slung over his shoulder, 21 years old, an inch taller than the last time I had seen him, Lena. He dropped the duffel. He hugged me hard. He said into my shoulder, Hae-young. I said, Jun-ho-ya. We stepped apart. He looked at me the way the older sibling looks at the younger when the older is checking for damage, except he was the younger one and I was the damage. I said, long bus. He said, 3 hours 40. We sat on a park bench by the garrison fence. A small concrete park bench by the southern administrative boundary of Yongsan Garrison, the place where the wall is just chain link because nobody decided whether the strip of grass on the south side counted as base land. We sat. The Saturday evening was warm. The crickets were starting up. He said the squad leader signed off because Sergeant Cho said her cousin works in the bureau and Cho's office is, what did she say, committed to family-considerate apprehension protocols. I said, they want me to come in. He said, I figured. I said, I'm not going to. He said, good. He pulled a small foil packet out of his pocket, 2 unlit Marlboros. He gave one to me. Neither of us lit it. He held his between 2 fingers. I held mine the way I held things I was not going to use. He said, I called Mom Wednesday. She knows. I said, how is she? He said, worried, not angry. Dad's at the wholesaler all day, so she's been calling our auntie. They want you to come down. I said, after this. He said, after what? I said, after I do something on TV. He asked it at 9:10. He said, did you find out about sharing? I said, I'll try now. He activated his class. The HUD updated. Source ability detected. Surveyor, F rank, passive sensory, within copy range. I copied. Active Surveyor Amp Plus, 3 2 times time, 00001 drain, source -8%. Surveyor at 3 2 times Amp Plus rendered the world as distances and elevations. The garrison fence was 14.6 meters from the bench. The street lamp 2 corners over was 47.2 meters. The wisteria branch across the path was 4.1 meters above the ground. The crickets, the loudest one, was 2.8 meters off to my left, in the grass. It was the most useless useful ability I had ever held. Junho, 8 feet away, did not grab his wrist. F-rank drain is minor, but he said, I can feel it. It's like an itch on the inside of my head. I said, I'm going to try to share it back. I had no command. The HUD did not list a transfer action. The brief between us, brother to brother, was the only mechanism I had. Focus, intent, or the ability to leave my body and enter his. I tried, I concentrated, I focused on Junho. I visualized the surveyor passing from my body to his. The HUD did not update. The surveyor stayed on me. Junho's HUD, visible only to him, stayed empty of the class. I tried again, harder, with the same focus I used to hold a long copy. Nothing. I tried for 2 minutes. Nothing. I dropped the copy. The HUD updated. Active surveyor terminated. Source unchanged. Junho said, yeah. I said, no transfer. The copy lives on my body. I cannot give it to anyone else. He said, okay. He was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he said, okay, then we do it different. You're my bank. I call, you copy what I need, you stand near me, the ability runs on you, I get the benefit nearby. I said, that works for in-person stuff, not for you in the army at Itaewon. He said, I know, but it works for when I get out, and it works for Mom and Dad if Mom ever gets sick again. I said, yeah. He said, it's enough. Hyarin's van was at the corner at 9:35. I had to go. Junho's bus back to Itaewon was at 11 p.m. We stood up from the bench. He picked up his duffel. He said, Hyung, the TV thing, when? I said, next 48 hours. He said, I'll find a TV. I said, don't take leave for it. The unit will need you. He said, there's a TV in the day room. I said, okay. He said, Hyung, don't lose. I said, I won't. He said, you move a subway car. That's the baseline, don't lose. I walked to the van. Hyarin was in the passenger seat. I got in the back. The van pulled away from the curb. Junho was at the corner with his duffel and his unlit cigarette. He waved once. I waved back. We drove away. Kang drove west through Yongsan toward the river. Hyarin in the passenger seat was on her tablet, reading something that made her exhale once and then again. The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank. I had tried to share with Junho and failed. The transfer did not work. I would be his bank. I would do the TV thing in the next 48 hours. I had a younger brother in fatigue pants on a corner in Yongsan with a duffel and an unlit cigarette who had told me not to lose. That was Saturday. The suspension email came at 9. Hyerin was at the kitchen table of the Yeonam-dong safe apartment in jeans and a hoodie, drinking the bad pour-over the apartment's coffee maker did. The notification pinged. She opened her laptop. The email was 3 paragraphs, signed by the Bureau's Director of Internal Affairs. The subject line was Notice of Administrative Suspension. She read it. She did not change expression. She turned the laptop toward me. I read it, the grounds, association with the target of an active apprehension order, the duration, pending formal hearing, the pay, withheld, the badge, to be surrendered at Bureau HQ at the suspended officer's convenience within 72 hours. She said, I expected Friday. I said, why Sunday? She said they needed to clear Kim's medical first. He's at severance, awake, talking, no lasting injury. They couldn't suspend me for associating with the apprehension target while an officer was unconscious, looked bad. He woke up last night. I said, I'm sorry. She said, don't be sorry. He'll be fine in 3 days, and the suspension is the start of my exit. I said, you planned this. She said, I plan to be ready for it. Cho appeared on the screen at 11. She turned the laptop to the news. Cho was at the bureau podium again, same suit, same restraint, same dark grey pocket square. He looked exactly the way he had at the Sunday briefing the week before. He did not bluff. He said, yesterday afternoon at 1500 hours, the bureau attempted a peaceful apprehension of the unregistered mimic at his Sinchon residence. The mimic resisted with an amplified anchor copy taken from a bureau officer. The officer is recovering. The building sustained structural damage. The mimic escaped. He said, the Bureau is committed to apprehension within the next 48 hours. I will personally lead the operation. We are asking the citizens of Seoul to come forward with any information regarding the location of Park Seo-jun, age 27, last seen wearing a charcoal jacket and dark trousers in the vicinity of Yonsei University, East Gate at 1510 on Saturday afternoon. He said, I want to address the mimic directly. We know what you have been doing in Itaewon and in Yeonam-dong. We understand the impulse. We do not understand the choice to remain unregistered while you operate. Come in, we will work with you. We have always worked with mimics. The registry is not a quarantine. The registry is a relationship, 48 hours. He stepped away from the podium. We sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. She sketched the plan. She said, MBC NewsHour, Wednesday 9 a.m. live segment. Anchor is Choi Hyun-woo, sympathetic to Bureau reform discourse, on record asking hard questions about the precursor events mimic suicides. I have his producer's number. I worked with her on a Bureau public relations response when I first joined. She owes me one favor. We booked the segment Tuesday under false identity. You show up Wednesday morning, live at the MBC building in Uedo. You answer one question on camera, you leave. I said, what's the question? She said, why didn't you register? I said, and the answer? She said, you answer in 3 minutes. You name Jayan, you name Sang-cheol, you name the blid woman if she'll consent, you name my brother, you name the 73 days of no touch, you walk out of the building. I said, and then? She said, then Cho responds, then the public responds, then we see if the registry survives the conversation. I said, will I be arrested at MBC? She said, probably, but the segment will have aired, and Cho's apprehension protocol does not include arresting a registered awakener on live national TV without a warrant signed by the Justice Ministry, which he doesn't have. I said, yet. She said, yet. I told her at 4:30. I said, I want to test something tomorrow. She said, what? I said, my maximum AMP plus. I've held up to 41 times on a B rank. The discourse threads estimate the ceiling at around 100 times on an S rank. I haven't copied an S rank yet. I need to know what the ceiling actually is before Wednesday. She said, why? I said, because Cho is going to ask me on Tuesday or Wednesday through a back channel, not on TV, what my real ceiling is. If I know, I can negotiate. If I don't, he negotiates with my ignorance. She said, "Where do you copy an S rank?" I said, "There's an event at COEX Seongsu tomorrow night. A celebrity awakener, Choi Da-yoon, S-rank strike, the K-pop trainee from the Awakening special last week. She's leaving an event at 9 p.m. Public sidewalk, fan crowd, 10 meters of clearance. I can be in the crowd. I copy her on the way out. She drains briefly. Bureau will mark it. I'll be gone." She said, "It will put you on every camera in the city." I said, "I'm on every camera anyway." She said, "Yes." Hyerin slept on the couch at the safe apartment. I took the small bedroom. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The MBC producer would be at her desk at 9 on Monday morning, and Hyerin would call her then. The strike test would be Monday night. The TV would be Wednesday morning. The bureau was 48 hours from 48 hours. I slept 3 hours and woke at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark of someone else's spare room until the light came up over Yeonam-dong. The K-pop event ended at 8:50. COEX Seongsu, a small-scale awakening showcase, had just let out an event for K-pop trainees who had classed in the Global Awakening. Most of the trainees were D or C rank. Choi Da-yoon, 19, was the only S rank that had been televised on a Korean variety show that week. She had been the closing act of the showcase. 50 or 60 fans were on the sidewalk waiting for her exit. I was one of them. I was in the navy windbreaker Hyerin had bought me at a Hapjeong Uniqlo on Saturday. Different jacket from Yongsan, different fit, slightly different posture. I was in the third row of the crowd. I watched the side door. At 8:58, the side door opened. 2 security guards came out first, then Choi's manager, then Choi herself, sweatsuit, Yankees cap pulled low, hair tied back, no makeup. She waved at the crowd. The crowd shouted her name. She walked toward a black van at the curb. At her closest pass to me, she was about 6 meters from the curb and 10 meters from where I was standing. The HUD updated. Source ability detected, strike, S-rank, single target, within copy range. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. I copied. Active strike amp plus, 87 4 times time, 00001 drain, source minus 68%. I held the copy for 30 seconds before I walked. The amp plus value sat in the corner of my vision, 87. I had not seen a number that high. The drain at 68% meant Choi Da-yoon, in her van pulling out of the underground exit at COEX, had just collapsed against her seat back. Her manager would be calling for an ambulance in about 90 seconds. The crowd was dispersing. I walked the other direction, east, away from COEX, toward the row of abandoned warehouses along the Yongnangshan stream. The warehouses were post-industrial Seoul, a partial demolition zone, mostly empty since the city's reroute of the freight line in 2023. I found the third warehouse on the row. The roll-up door was partly open. I went in. I was in the warehouse at 9:08. Empty concrete floor, 3 reinforced concrete block support columns at the interior corners, each about 30 centimeters square, each holding up its share of the roof. Industrial debris along the walls. A pigeon in the rafters made a small annoyed sound and flew out a high window. I walked to the middle of the floor. I raised my right hand the way Choi Da-yoon did in her event clips, palm out, fingers slightly curled. I fired. The first column did not crack. It vaporized. A perfect cylindrical hole, 2 meters wide, drilled through the concrete and through the rebar and out the back of the column. Dust came down in a clean horizontal slice from the ceiling above the hole. Strike at amp plus 87, 4 times from S-rank baseline. The math, later, about 437 megajoules of compressed air pulse force focused on the column's centerline. The column's failure mode was not fracture, it was sublimation. I fired again, second column vaporized, the roof groaned. I fired a third time, third column vaporized. The roof now rested on the warehouse's outer concrete block walls and one remaining fourth column at the back of the building. It held. Stamina 38%/100%. I dropped the strike. The HUD went inactive. I stood in the middle of a warehouse floor and breathed for 30 seconds. I walked out at 9:15. I left through the same roll-up door I had come in. I walked the embankment of the Yongsan for 2 blocks east, came up onto a side street, and got on a bus going west. The bus was nearly empty. I sat in the back. I checked my phone. A bureau monitor alert had already surfaced on a news app. Choi Da-yoon hospitalized for exhaustion after appearance. Fans concerned. The article was timestamped 9:11, 6 minutes after the drain. The bureau had had the source drain residual since 9:01 and would cross-reference the AMP plus math by 9:14. Cho's office would have my ceiling on the internal threat assessment by 9:15. By the time the bus reached Hapjeong at 9:45, the bureau would know what I could do. I got back to the safe apartment at 10:30. Hyerin's tablet lit up at 10:34 with the next tier apprehension authorization. Bureau's tactical division was now cleared for live-fire engagement in the event of resistance. She put the tablet face down on the kitchen table and said, "They know." I said, "I know they know." The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank. The warehouse 3 blocks from COEX Seongsu had 3 perfect holes in 3 concrete columns. Choi Da-yoon was at a San medical center being given fluids. I had 2 days until MBC. The Nokia buzzed at 6:34. Hyerin's spare phone, a small old Nokia she kept as a deadman, the kind of phone that took only text messages and a single phone number to SIM card pairing, buzzed on the kitchen table. The alert was from the cleaning lady at her Mapo apartment building, who was a former bureau medical contact's cousin and had been told to text this number if anyone in bureau windbreakers showed up at Hyerin's door. The text was 2 words, "They came." Hyerin read it. She woke me on the safe apartment couch. She said, "We move." I said, "What did they take?" She checked the bureau internal affairs portal on her laptop. She said, "Brother's box, the Gimpo files, the psych evals, the photographs." I said, "They'll go to your brother's storage unit next." She said, "I know." I said, "And then they'll come here." She said, "They don't know about here yet. We have maybe 4 hours." Hyerin called the MBC producer at 8. She used a burner phone, different from the Nokia, a prepaid handset bought at a Mapo GS25 that morning. She dialed Park Yoon-jae from memory. She said, "Yoon-jae, I'm calling in the favor." Yoon-jae said, "What favor?" Hyerin said, "Wednesday morning 9 a.m. live segment with the Mimic." The pause on the other end was long enough that I heard it from across the kitchen. Yoon-jae said, "Yoon, I don't have that kind of clearance." Hyerin said, "You have Choi Hyun-woo. He's been wanting to ask the bureau about my brother for 3 years. Tell him the answer just walked in." Pause. Yoon-jae said, "If we do this, Choi will get fired. I will get fired. The segment will be pulled in the middle and replaced with a public safety statement." Hyerin said, "The segment has to air 3 minutes, live, then he can be pulled." Yoon-jae said, 3 minutes. Hyerin said, 3 minutes. Yoon-jae said, "Where do I find him on Wednesday?" Hyerin said, 8:45 a.m. MBC Uedo Building Service Entrance, Sub-Basement 2, the press elevators. Yoon-jae said, "I'll have a press lanyard with someone else's name on it." She hung up. Hyerin put the burner down on the kitchen table. She said, "It's on." We left the Yeonam-dong apartment at 11. Hyerin packed a duffel, the yellow legal pad with our notes, her brother's photograph from the kitchen counter, small, framed. The bureau had not seen this one because it had been in her personal locker for 4 years. Her brother's last letter in the inside pocket of her jacket, a change of clothes, the burner, the Nokia, the prepaid SIMs. I had my backpack from Monday. We left the apartment key with Lee Jae-yeon, the ex-bureau medical contact who held the lease. She came to collect the key at 10:45. She did not say anything. She nodded at me. She left. We took a taxi to a small love motel in Hapjeong. Love motels are off the bureau's standard surveillance grid. The bureau does not search them as a matter of policy in non-criminal investigations, and the booking systems are paper only at most of the older ones. We checked in, under Lee Jae-yeon's national ID, which she had lent us for 24 hours. Room 314, 4th floor, 2 single beds. The wallpaper was patterned in tiny gold roses. The bathroom mirror had a small fluorescent ring around it. The bedside table had a single complimentary sachet of instant coffee and a packet of menthol gum. Hyrin sat on one bed. I sat on the other. She said, 21 hours. I said, 21 hours. We slept in shifts. Hyrin took the first 4 hours. I took the next 4. She had her brother's letter in the inside pocket of her jacket and the photograph face down on the nightstand. The MBC building was 12 minutes by taxi from the Hapjeong motel. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The bureau was going to hit her storage unit by midnight. The TV was at 9 in the morning. We had 21 hours. The tip came at 10:30. I was at the Hapjeong motel, room 314, the wallpaper of tiny gold roses, the 2 single beds. Hyrin was at the door, the burner in her hand. The voice on the telegram channel was distorted but recognizable to anyone who had heard Cho do a press briefing, same cadence, same restraint, same length of pause between sentences. The channel was one the underground monitored. The voice said, "Mimic at Gwanghwamun Plaza, 11 p.m. alone, would talk to the director." Hyrin closed the door behind her. She said, "It's bait, he's going to take you." I said, "He can't take me at Gwanghwamun in front of 4 reporters without an arrest authorization signed by the Justice Minister, which he doesn't have. He can attack me, which means I get to demonstrate on camera. That's the same demonstration we were going to do at MBC tomorrow, minus the producer plus the director." She said, "And if you're wrong?" I said, "Then we do MBC tomorrow with me missing." She said, "You're not missing if Cho has you." I said, "He won't have me. He'll have a sentinel I copied from him on a hot mic." She was silent for 30 seconds. She said, "I'll be there." I said, "Not in the plaza, at a distance, camera on me, if I'm down you publish." She nodded. I walked across Gwanghwamun Plaza, alone, at 10:50. The plaza was mostly empty. The King Sejong statue lit at the far end, the Yisun-shin statue at the opposite end, a May evening breeze picking up loose litter off the paving stones, 4 reporters in a cordon 30 meters back from the central paving, 2 of them on shoulder-mount video, the other 2 on phones. Cho was in the middle of the plaza, standing under street lamp. Dark suit, bureau field officer kit, gun belt with the small bureau issue stunner holstered. He saw me walk up. He said, "Mr. Park." I said, "Director." He said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "You knew I would." He said, "I hoped." He smiled briefly. He said, "You have a TV booking tomorrow at MBC. I'd like to spare both of us that. I'd like to propose an alternative." I said, "Go ahead." Cho laid out the offer at 11:02. He said, "Register tomorrow morning at the Bureau Mapo office, 8 a.m., before the MBC segment airs. Frank Mimic, AMP Plus verified at 87. You retain civilian status. You work as a registered consultant for the Bureau's Anomaly Recovery Unit on a contract basis. The Bureau guarantees you no containment, no forced isolation. We pay you. You help us with situations where the Bureau's existing roster cannot manage fires, building collapses, situations like Yongsan. You are not asked to give up your friendships, your home, your family. The registry becomes, in your case, what it was always supposed to be, a relationship. Your friend Officer Yoon's brother, Yoon Tae-min, would have benefited from this arrangement. We did not have this arrangement in 2022. We do now. I am offering it personally. I have authorization from the Justice Minister." He paused. He said, "The alternative is the MBC segment, which I cannot prevent legally, but which I am required by my office to follow with an apprehension on suspicion of public safety violation in the Choi Da-yoon incident at COEX, which produces a 36-hour detention, a hearing, and an outcome the Bureau cannot guarantee. The hearing might exonerate you. It might not. The 36 hours will be in containment." I said, 3 minutes. He said, "For what?" I said, 3 minutes for me to answer. He said, "Take 3 minutes." I took my 3 minutes at 11:05. I said, Director, the arrangement you're offering Yoon Tae-min would have benefited from. He is not here to take it. He went 73 days without a touch and ended his life in a Gimpo facility. He was offered an arrangement when his AMP Plus was 8.4. Mine is 87. The offer scales with the threat the Bureau perceives. 3 years ago it was containment. Today it's consultant work. 3 years from now it's... I did not finish the sentence. I said, I'm going to MBC tomorrow. Cho's face did not change. He said, then I am required to act. He raised his right hand. The HUD updated. Source ability detected, Sentinel, B rank, passive defensive, within copy range. Source ability detected, Lightning Strike, a rank, single target, within copy range. Cho activated Sentinel, a thin shimmer at his torso, and aimed his lightning strike at me. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. I did not copy the lightning, I copied the Sentinel. Active Sentinel AMP Plus, 23 2 times time, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 drain, source minus 47%. Cho's barrier flickered. His AMP Plus ceiling on Sentinel was capped at his B rank baseline. Under a 47% drain on the source he could not push his own copy through. He fired the lightning. The bolt hit my Sentinel at 23 times B rank and dissipated. The Plaza's microphones picked up the discharge crack. The reporters' cameras zoomed. Cho fired again, dissipated. He stopped firing. He went to one knee. His hand was on the Plaza ground. He was grey. I walked 5 steps toward him. I dropped to a crouch in front of him, eye level. I spoke loudly enough for the cordon microphones to pick me up. I said, I copied something from you. It feels like you're missing a fingernail. Imagine living with that for a year. I said, that's what registry does. I said, your tape on Yoon Tae-min in the Gimpo facility said he went 73 days without a touch. The Bureau called it medical isolation. The discourse called him a parasite. I said, he was my friend's brother. I dropped the Sentinel copy. The HUD went inactive. Cho's Sentinel returned to him. He stood up slowly, still grey. He said quietly into his own collar microphone, you have your 3 minutes on TV tomorrow. I walked out of the Plaza. The reporters did not follow. They were uploading the footage live. Hye-rin's car was at the curb on Sejongdaero. Hye-rin drove west on Sejongdaero at 25 over the limit. The HUD in the corner of my vision was blank. The Plaza's microphones had carried the monologue to 4 live feeds. By the time we reached Mapo Bridge, the segment was on every news channel in Korea. By the time we reached the Hapjeong Love Motel, it was trending in Japan. I had not delivered the line that the registry must be ended. I had described what the registry did. The line that ends the registry would be tomorrow. The phone rang at 6. Hye-rin's burner, she was already awake. She answered on the second ring. The producer Yoon-jae was on the line. She said, Cho called me at 5:40. He wants to do the segment with him, live. He says he won't move on you if you'll sit across from him. Hye-rin said, and you said? Yoon-jae said, I said you'd call me back in 20. Hye-rin looked at me. I had been awake for 2 hours. I said, tell her yes. Hye-rin said into the phone, yes. Yoon-jae said, 9 a.m., 2 chairs, Choi Hyun-woo moderates, 16-minute segment. I will pull Cho off the air if he says anything that sounds like a threat. He has agreed in writing. Hye-rin said, done. We were in Studio C at 9 in the morning. MBC Studio C Uedo, the center desk, the 2 side chairs, Choi Hyun-woo at the desk, 52, grey-streaked hair, the kind of anchor who had been at MBC long enough to remember the analog years. I was in the chair on his left, navy windbreaker over a charcoal shirt. Cho was in the chair on his right, same suit, no tie, the same dark grey pocket square. The studio crew was at minimum staffing for the live segment. The producer's booth was Yoon-jae and 1 assistant. The on-air light went green at 9:00. Choi Hyun-woo opened. We have an unprecedented segment this morning. Park Seo-jun, the unregistered mimic the Bureau of Awakening Affairs has been seeking, is here. Director Cho Tae-min of the Bureau is here. Both have agreed to a live conversation about the registry. Mr. Park, may I begin with you? Why did you not register your class under the standard Mimic protocol last Friday? I took the question slowly. I said, I did register. I registered as F-rank Mimic, pending verification, on Friday afternoon at the MAPO Bureau office. What I did not do was register as F-rank Mimic AMP plus 87. The Bureau's standard Mimic protocol for a verified AMP plus above 30 is supervised containment. Director Cho can correct me if I have that wrong. Cho said, you have it right. I said, the supervised containment protocol is functionally a quarantine. Officer Yoon Tae-min, Director Cho's previous Mimic apprehension in 2022, AMP plus 8.4, was placed in supervised containment at the Bureau's Gimpo facility. He went 73 days without physical contact with any awakened individual. He took his own life at 24. The official cause was depression. The actual cause was protocol. Cho said with restraint, that is partially true. The protocol was applied incorrectly in the 2022 case. The Bureau has since revised it. The Justice Ministry is reviewing the revision. I said, when did the Bureau revise it? Cho said, in 2024. I said, why didn't the revision get implemented until I refused to register on Friday? Cho was silent. Choi Hyun-woo said, Director. Cho said after a long moment, because no Mimic requested verification under the new protocol between 2024 and last week. The protocol existed on paper. I said, right. The segment closed at 9:14. Choi Hyun-woo at the close. Director Cho, the Justice Ministry will be reviewing the Mimic containment protocol effective tomorrow morning. Mr. Park, what will you do? I said, I will register at the MAPO office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I will register under the revised protocol. I am asking for the same arrangement Director Cho offered me at Gwanghwamun last night. Consultant status, F-rank Mimic, AMP plus verified, no containment, contract basis, available for emergency response. Cho said, the Bureau accepts. Choi Hyun-woo said, then the segment ends here, thank you both. The on-air light went red. Yoon-jae walked onto the set from the booth and shook my hand without saying anything. Cho stood. He nodded at me. He walked out the side door with his 2 bureau aides. Hyerin met me at the studio exit. We went out the front door of the MBC building onto the Uedo sidewalk and got in a cab. The cab took us to a small cafe in Mapo. My mother called at 11. We were at a window table at the cafe with 2 Americanos. My phone rang. The display said Ioma. I answered. She said in the Yosu dialect, Ego son, I saw. I said, Mom. She said, you're coming home. I said, Saturday, after registration. She said, Dad's at the wholesaler, but he saw on the TV. He says it was a good speech. I said, tell him I said thanks. She said, Junho's commander called. He's getting Saturday leave too. I said, good. She said, I love you, son. I said, I love you, Mom. I hung up. Hyerin, across the table, said, my brother would have loved that segment. I said, I think so. She said, after a long pause, thank you for naming him. I said, of course. We drank our coffee. We sat in the cafe until the lunch crowd came. The HUD was blank in the corner of my vision. The Bureau Registry was under ministry review. I had a registration appointment in the morning. My mother had told me to come home on Saturday. Junho would be home Saturday too. Hyerin would not be in trouble forever. Yoon-jae's lawyer was already negotiating her suspension into a transfer to the Justice Ministry's Awakening Affairs Review Board. The cafe served the coffee in plain white mugs, and the light at the window was the way Mapo light is at noon in late May. I walked into the bureau at 8:50. 1 week after the MBC segment, the revolving door of the Mapo office turned the same way it had the Friday I had registered 2 weeks ago. The front desk clerk recognized me. She did not pretend not to. She handed me a paper ticket number, B04, and turned back to the queue. The waiting room was sparser than 2 weeks before. Most awakeners had been processed. I sat in a plastic chair. The PA called B04 at 9:00. I walked to interview room 12B, the same room, the same beige walls, the same window onto the courtyard. Hyerin's old desk was empty. Her transfer to the Justice Ministry Awakening Affairs Review Board had gone through 3 days earlier. The officer at the desk was different. Senior Field Officer Choi Yun-hai, 36, B-rank verifier, the kind of officer the Bureau put on high-profile registrations because verifiers could passively confirm class declarations against system data. She was professional, she knew who I was, she did not pretend not to. She walked me to the 3rd floor. The exam was in the 3rd floor gym. A converted bureau gym, 50 meters by 20, ceiling height 7 meters, a marked target line at the far end. A 50-kilogram sandbag at one end of the floor. 2 A-rank construct awakeners stood at the side. Bureau staff, full disclosure of the test condition. The lead was Awakener Jung Min-yi, 30, A-rank construct, lift ceiling approximately 1,200 kilograms. Choi Yun-hai said, "Mr. Park, you will copy Awakener Jung's lift ability. You will then lift the 50-kilogram sandbag from its current position to the target area, 40 feet up. The Bureau evaluators will record the AMP plus coefficient and the demonstration quality. Awakener Jung has consented to the source drain." I nodded. Jung activated lift. The HUD updated. Source ability detected. Lift. A rank single use per minute within copy range. I tapped my thumb against my index finger twice. I copied. Active lift AMP plus 31 8 times time 0.0001 drain. Source minus 52%. I raised my right hand. The sandbag lifted smoothly off the floor, rose at a controlled rate to the target area, stopped at the marked line on the gym wall. I held it there for 10 seconds. I lowered it. I dropped the copy. The HUD went inactive. Jung sat down on the bench at the edge of the floor. He was gray. He was stable. The evaluators recorded the scores. Choi Yun-hai said, B plus output, AMP plus 31.8 on a rank source. The recommendation will go to the registry director. I nodded. Choi Yun-hai had the recommendation at 9:55. Back in interview room 12B, the Bureau's revised protocol section 4.2c on her tablet, the evaluator's notes attached. She read the recommendation out. Subject Park Seo-jun demonstrates AMP plus coefficient 31.8 on A-rank source ability under standard test conditions, with B plus output quality. Her revised mimic classification protocol section 4.2c, subjects demonstrating B plus output on A-rank, source recommend reclassification to S-tier with consultant grade certification. She looked at me. She said, "Mr. Park, the Bureau is recommending you be reclassified S-tier." I said, "I'd like to decline." She did not flinch. She said, "On what basis?" I said, "My AMP plus is random per copy. The 87 was one roll. The 31.8 today was another. The 1.4 I rolled on my roommate's Ignite last Wednesday was another. My ceiling is not a class. My class is F-rank mimic. The rank field on the card should reflect what the system labeled me. The amplifier field should reflect that it varies. I will accept consultant grade certification at F-rank." She thought about it for 10 seconds. She said, "I can record that as your declared preference. The Bureau may override." I said, "Let them." She nodded. She printed the registration card on the small printer at the side of her desk. She slid it across the table. I walked out of interview room 12B at 10:15. The card was plastic, credit card size. My Samlink ID photograph from 3 months earlier was printed on the front, badly, with the corner of my left ear cropped slightly. The class field said mimic. The rank field said F. The AMP plus field said variable. I put the card in my back pocket. I walked down the corridor to the elevator. I rode it 12 floors to the lobby. I walked out through the revolving door at the front of the Bureau office. Hyerin was at the revolving door. She was in a navy blazer. The small 5-pointed Bureau pin on her left lapel had been replaced with the slightly different Justice Ministry Awakening Affairs Review Board pin, 6-pointed, copper. She nodded at me. I nodded at her. We walked out into the afternoon. The HUD updated. Registration confirmed. Class Mimic, rank F amp plus, variable. Then it went blank. I stood on the sidewalk outside the bureau lobby with the registration card in my back pocket and the HUD blank in the corner of my vision, and Hirin 2 steps to my right. I had wanted, on Tuesday morning 2 weeks ago, to read a window in the corner of my vision a third time in case the third reading would be the one that changed it. The third reading had not changed it. I had instead changed what the registry meant for the next mimic who walked into a bureau office. I had not stopped being F rank. The card in my back pocket said so. Doesn't matter what rank they put. Tomorrow I'll copy something else.